Bonjour, if you've clicked on this video, it's probably because you're looking to improve your French level. In this video, I'm going to give you my best tips that I've picked up during my many years of learning French that will hopefully save you a lot of time and frustration and help you progress in French and hopefully one day help you become fluent. The first most important step that I wish someone had told me at the very start of my journey of learning French is the importance of mastering French phonetics. Phonetics is the building blocks of any language, and if you don't have the knowledge of French phonetics before you start, it's going to be very, very difficult to make real progress. Now, something I would recommend focusing on is the nasal vowels. They're very difficult to master, and a lot of people end up mixing them up and not distinguishing between them because they have very subtle differences. For example, the sound en and the sound on. They almost sound the same, but they're not. For example, in the word lent versus long. Lent means slow and long means long. And people end up mushing these words together and just saying long, long for both, but they actually have different pronunciations with different vowel sounds that are represented by the different letters. Lent is L-E-N-T and long is L-O-N-G. So I would really recommend taking some time to work on French phonetics, making sure that you know the differences between all the different nasal vowel sounds. And mastering French phonetics is really going to help you learn how to spell words correctly in French. When you see a word written down, you'll be able to know how to pronounce it even if you've never heard it pronounced before. Something that we can't say the same of in English. English is not a phonetic language, and learning how to pronounce English is very, very difficult for non-native speakers. But French, once you've learnt the phonetics, this is going to be a real tool that you can use to help you have a good pronunciation. It's going to help you be able to tune your ear and really pick up words and eventually phrases. So this is a step that I would definitely focus on first before skipping ahead and trying to learn anything harder. The next thing I'd recommend is making sure that you're doing listening and speaking practice from the very beginning. It's very easy to just get stuck in the passive skills, which you're listening and you're reading, and not prioritize speaking from the very beginning. And I think that is a mistake because French is actually very hard to pronounce and something that requires practice. And so if you start that journey from the very beginning, you're going to stutter less and stumble less later on when you're trying to speak and strike up conversations. And you could even start with simple words as you're going about your day, making sure you're saying words in French. If you've just learnt the days of the week, making sure that you say which day it is in French. And once you feel comfortable pronouncing singular words, you can then start building. But of course, for that, you'll need some grammar, which we'll talk about later. One of my best tips is voice recording yourself or voice noting yourself. I've seen other people recommend sending yourself text. Now, that could be a good idea if you want to improve your writing, but I would really encourage speaking from the very beginning, and therefore voice noting is going to allow you to practice, maybe without the judgment of others if you're worried about making mistakes. It doesn't matter if it's slow and disjointed, that's normal in the beginning. It will just help you practice on your own if you don't have anyone to practice with. Of course, the best way to practice a language is with somebody else, whether this is a friend, a language partner, going to in-person immersion events where French speakers want to practice your language with you and you can practice French with them. Tutors, if you can get yourself a French tutor, that's also great. And if you would like personalized French tutoring, I'll leave a link in the description where you can go to my website to book a lesson with me. And a bonus tip, if you can, is to travel to France as much as possible. Obviously, I know this is not possible for everyone, but if you're on holiday in France, make sure you're trying to at least say basic words if that's your level, or basic phrases if that's your level. And you'll actually find that people in France really appreciate when you try to speak their language. If you get stuck, they'll try to help you, and it will be daunting and embarrassing at first, but you really have to get over the embarrassment of making mistakes, because when you're learning a language, that's just how it is. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You're just learning. If you reverse the roles and someone who was trying to learn English was trying to ask you something in English and they made a mistake, you wouldn't laugh or be rude to them. You would just help them and actually be impressed that they're trying. And that's exactly the same when you're having a go at speaking French. It's all about having a go. And if you don't make the mistakes, you'll never improve. So that's definitely a hurdle that I had to get over. I was really, really shy and I didn't want to speak because I didn't want people to hear my bad accent and I didn't want people to hear me making mistakes. And actually that really hindered me and held me back for a long time because I wasn't practicing. And getting better at speaking and becoming fluent and having a good accent are things that are developed by speaking a lot over a long period of time. And that's something I didn't do, that I had to learn the hard way later when I arrived in France and I had no choice but to speak. So if you can start from the beginning, speaking just a little bit every single day, incorporating the French language into your daily life, even if you don't have anyone necessarily to practice with, using the tips I've just given you, hopefully that will help you improve your speaking. Now we're going to move on to talk about grammar. French grammar is very very daunting. It's notoriously difficult. Even in France, children start learning French grammar in primary school at the age of 7. That's how hard it is. But if you take it step by step, divide it into manageable chunks, it's actually very much doable across a couple of months. So I would focus on a number of key areas, obviously starting with the present tense. So the most basic thing to master is conjugations. Unfortunately, this is a memory game. It's about memorizing. So you want to be memorizing your regular verbs, your irregular verbs in the present tense, the past tense, so the passé composé, the imperfect, which is another past tense called l'imparfait. You also want to be learning the future, so I'm going to do this, as well as the simple future, I will do this, and also the conditional. Something to also get familiar with is what an infinitive is, so to do something. That's the verb that you'll find in French in the dictionary, and that's going to be very helpful. A lot of grammar will be things like I'm going to plus infinitive. So you'll find that infinitives are going to be really helpful when trying to form phrases, and in particular your future tenses. Something else I would strongly recommend if you're a beginner in French trying to improve your grammar is getting to grips with which verbs take avoir when conjugated in the passé composé and which verbs take être. Those are definitely to be memorized if you want to avoid making simple grammar mistakes, saying things like j'ai allé rather than je suis allé. The good news is French grammar is rigid, so once you've learnt the rules and the order of the sentence, etc., things like the gender and the agreements, doesn't tend to change. It's not as flexible in the word order as it is in English, so that's actually really helpful because once you've mastered the word order and all your agreements in gender and number, it actually is very easy to produce the language. So now we're going to talk about the use of media to help you learn French. This is something I definitely did and is actually a really fun way to consistently practice the language every single day. Now, if you are very, very beginner and you can only pick out simple words, you can find very easy recordings where they just say colours or they just say months. And that would be something that you would be wanting to just be able to familiarise yourself with how they sound, to be able to pick out those words. If you're a little bit more advanced, you can watch children's animations. For example, I watched Peppa Pig. It was something I had watched as a child, so I knew the characters and I knew the storyline. I watched the French version and it really enabled me to pick out basic words. At first, I couldn't understand anything, so I really do sympathise if you are at that stage where you're finding it very overwhelming. When you listen to any French content, it's just sounding like gobbledygook and you can't understand anything. You really do need to break it down, and it also helps with watching things that you're already familiar with so that you simplify the task and make it easier for yourself by already having things that are familiar to you, such as the storyline and the characters. If you're past the beginning stages, I would highly recommend watching French vlogs. Watching vlogs in French is an excellent way to improve your comprehension because it shows you the language in a real life setting. It shows you the types of expressions that French people use on a day-to-day basis, and the context of the activities they're doing really does help you. Even if you're not able to understand everything they're saying, you've got a visual idea of what's going on. That's going to really help you pick up real life vocabulary and give you this immersive experience through the internet that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have if you can't travel to France. For very, very beginners, I found this YouTube channel called French Facile. It's a man that does these vlogs with very, very simple vocabulary, speaks very slowly, has English and French subtitles on the screen so you can follow along. So if you're more of a beginner level, I would definitely recommend that you give his channel a watch. If you're more of an intermediate level, a channel I found called Piece of French does very good blogs, and she puts these speech bubbles that tell you what different expressions mean, which is very, very handy. So I would definitely go and give her channel a watch if you're more of a late beginner, early intermediate stage. That's going to really help you tune your ear and understand expressions in the context of sentences, and being able to get used to the fact that French people do speak quite fast. So it's going to really help you tune your ear to that as well. Podcasts are also a great way to learn French because they get you used to being able to listen to French without having any subtitles, without having any images or video on the screen to help you work out the context of things. It really is about tuning your ear. This is something that is actually really difficult to do. Listening to podcasts is maybe something I'd recommend if you're slightly more of an intermediate level. A podcast that I used to listen to that I think is really great is called Easy French Podcast. I'll put a link in the description to that. There's many other Easy French podcasts for learners on Spotify, so feel free to search up and choose whichever one suits you. Podcasts are really great because they allow you to hear dialogue between different people, so it really helps you train the ability to follow the conversation. Sometimes the topics can change very quickly. I'd also recommend doing some interactive writing practice, so things like writing diary entries, postcards, letters to people. It's very important that you also practice your writing as well as your speaking. Writing, it's going to to be the implementation of all the grammar that you have learnt. It doesn't matter if some of the grammar is wrong if you're still in the beginning stages of learning the grammar, but it's important that you put that into practice, and it's very important that you're thinking about the conjugations and the agreements in written French. So I would strongly recommend that you also practice written French alongside the spoken French. If you're still at the very, very beginning of learning French, just basic words, of course flashcards are a very good idea as well, but we want to get out of this habit of just learning singular words as quickly as possible. For in particular apps that have you just do these sort of vocabulary tests every single day, you never really progress into learning to be able to speak French because you don't have the knowledge to be able to put those words together. You don't have the knowledge of expressions, and people often find themselves stuck just with vocabulary and not knowing what to do with it. So I would definitely make sure that you're learning phrases, daily expressions, things that French speakers use every single day, and that's where watching vlogs is going to come in really handy. If you're more advanced, you could of course watch Netflix series, whether it's YouTube channels or Netflix series. You can of course start by putting the subtitles in English. When that gets too easy, you turn them into French so that you're reading what you're hearing. I had to do that for a very long time, probably 2 years before I could eventually take them off and be confident to understand. And even then, of course, it's going to be very difficult at first. You're going to feel like your comfort blanket's been ripped away from you. You kind of panic and don't understand what people are saying because it's not written on the screen. But it's about training your ear to really pick out what people are saying, and that just comes with practice and with time. One last tip I'm going to give you to stop you translating word for word, because that's a very bad habit that we need to get rid of. It's something that we all do naturally at the beginning of our language learning journey. I would highly recommend, if you're learning even just singular words or expressions, that you associate those singular words to objects and that you associate expressions to concepts. So for example, if you're learning the word phone, portable, you don't actually think portable means phone. You get your phone in your hand and you associate the word portable with a physical object. This can work for anything in your household. If you are learning expressions, things like s'entendre bien, je m'entends bien avec lui, for example, I get on well with him, you're imagining yourself in your head getting on well with a friend or getting on well with your partner. Instead of je m'entends bien avec lui means I get on well with him. It's trying to break this habit of always translating word for word. When I started associating words with physical objects and also expressions with concepts, that's when I saw a massive improvement in my French level. Something that helped me improve my reading level in French was reading easy to understand news articles. Even books that have been adapted for French beginners are a really useful idea. I remember I used to read books that would have one page in French and the other page in English with the translation, and I would try my best to read all of the French, and if there was something I didn't understand, I would look at the English side. But there are many materials online. Whilst I do think doing reading exercises is of course a good idea, I would definitely get into the habit of consuming written content. Maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a small diary entry of someone, maybe it's a simple news article, but try to get into the habit of consuming various different formats of French, because a mistake I made was I didn't really consume enough formal French, and then it felt a bit overwhelming if I had to read any hard French with any jargon in it. So I definitely wouldn't neglect reading formal French, so news articles, etc. But I would also try to read some informal French as well. Just wanted to talk a little bit about motivation and mindset. Learning any language takes time, and although French is meant to be one of the easier languages, I do actually think it takes a lot of time to really master French, more than people want to let on. So just be kind to yourself, celebrate the small wins, set yourself small manageable goals that you can hit so you can feel a sense of achievement and feel that you're really progressing rather than it being this big uphill struggle. I definitely think consistency is key, and something I didn't do enough in my previous years of learning French before moving to France. I underestimated the importance of daily contact with the language. It's very, very important to learn French every single day, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes a day, if that's all you have time for. That's much better than doing long, hefty sessions every 2 to 3 weeks, for example. Making sure you're setting aside the time every single day and giving yourself the tools so that you can give yourself the best possible chance of progressing in French. I'm thinking of creating an in-depth guide on how to learn French with really specific examples of mistakes I made that should be avoided, specific examples of grammar points that I think are very interesting to look at, as well as idiomatic expressions that are going to be imperative to speaking like a native speaker. So if that's something you would be interested in, I'll leave a link in the description where you can sign up to the waiting list. If you're trying to dramatically improve your level in French this year, or your level in any other foreign language for that matter, I have made an in-depth video called How to Learn Any Language with a 9-step framework, giving you all my best tips and in-depth advice on how to really master language learning. So I would recommend you give that a watch if you would like an in-depth step-by-step tutorial to help you learn any foreign language, whether it be French or another language. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments how your French language learning journey is going, as well as any other videos you would like to see in the future.